The European Union and India are partners with much in common. They have similar values and interests, increasingly convergent views on many global challenges, and are working together to forge a strong partnership on economic, political, and environmental issues. The EU represents a unique economic and political union of 27 member states. Its success has been built on fundamental values: democracy, the rule of law, a market economy, human rights, and the protection of minorities. With free movement of people, goods, services, and capital, the EU is a unified market of 500 million citizens. In fact, the world's largest single market. Common policies and programs in other areas such as agriculture, science and technology, environment, education and social development have brought increasing stability and prosperity to this once divided continent. The European Union believes strongly in multilateral solutions to global problems. It accounts for over 20% of world trade, a third of world foreign direct investments, and more than half of all development aid. India, progressively overcoming its development hurdles, has become an important player on the world stage and a significant partner for Europe. The dialogue between the European Union and India covers trade talks, cooperation for development, international peace and security, and the global environmental challenge.
The relationship with India is extremely comprehensive and covers many sectors. I think it's time from the European Union and India to have a modern look at their architecture and maybe to bring it more coherence and more political stability and more political legitimacy.
The European Union and India are significant political and economic entities in their own right. But in a multipolar and globalizing world, they are also strategic partners, providing international leadership and direction. The European Union and India are also aware of responsibilities towards less developed countries, evident from their approaches to the Doha round of trade negotiations under the World Trade Organization.
Well, I think we already share a very strong commitment to the multilateral trading system and to the importance of the WTO. The World Trade Organization has delivered much of the prosperity that the world knew in the second half of the last century and has the potential to contribute similarly in the 21st century.
Both have been instrumental through the G20 in developing a new approach to the key economic questions of the day and finding a way out of the global recession. The post-Cold War world is facing new security concerns, and these too are areas for international and bilateral collaboration. Environmental threats, being cross-border in nature, require strategic action. EU and Indian experts are working towards an agreement on climate change, which will be up to the challenge and reflect the concerns of the world's developed and developing regions. EU-India relations go back to the early 1960s. India was amongst the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with the European Community. The new millennium was a turning point in the EU-India political partnership with the first EU-India summit held in Lisbon. 4 years later, they upgraded relations to the level of a strategic partnership and drew up a joint action plan to cooperate in many new areas. This partnership has strengthened relations in a host of areas: trade and investment, science and technology, development and cooperation, energy and environment, security. It goes further to human rights, preserving multilingual cultures, and education. The opening up of the Indian economy in the early 90s had a very positive impact, not only on the breakneck pace of its development, but also on trade with the European Union. The EU is India's largest trading partner. Today, it represents 20% of exports and imports. Trade has rocketed from just over 4 billion euro in 1980 to almost 80 billion in 2008.
If you look at the figures in agricultural trade, India is quite strong on the European market, exporting products value 2 billion euros a year, whereas Europe is actually lacking a bit behind. We only managed to export for 250 million euros.
The EU is the largest source of foreign investment into India. India has also started investing in Europe in recent years. In fact, Indian investments in Europe in 2008 were larger than EU investments in India. To its traditional strengths in textiles, leather, gems and jewelry, India has added software, IT-enabled services, and automotive components. There is still significant room for progress though. The EU's Global Europe strategy clearly identified India as a priority partner for the future. The broad-based agreement on trade and investment, when concluded, will boost trade and investment in both directions. The EU is by far the biggest source of development assistance in the world. Its main objective with India is to help it reach the Millennium Development Goals and to develop critical infrastructure. The European Union is a partner in the government's Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan program, which is striving to make elementary education universal. As part of the education initiative in India, more than 2,400 Indian students are studying in Europe under the Erasmus Mundus scholarship program in a wide range of areas.
I'm looking forward to Europe. There's very little that we know. Sitting here in India, there's very little exposure. There's very little that we hear about the universities in Europe. So this is something new, and they have a very rich history. They have lots of cultures, lots of art, lots of music, and yeah, it's a good place to travel to.
For more than a decade, it has been involved in the drive to improve healthcare for mothers and their children. At the state level, Development Cooperation has been supporting reform programs in Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh for 5 years for the better management of drinking water, health services, and education. In the dryland areas of Western Haryana, the EU-supported Community Forestry Project has helped to combat deforestation and promote the role of women in development. Part of it was the first small-scale afforestation project in the world to get support from the Clean Development Mechanism. The EU also provides support to hundreds of non-governmental organizations working in remote areas. Recognizing that sustainable economic development goes a long way in addressing economic and social objectives, the Joint Action Plan initiated in 2005 has broadened the scope of cooperation to include areas such as energy efficiency and clean development. People caught up in natural or man-made disasters cannot always wait for development projects to take root. They need immediate help. The EU channels its humanitarian and emergency aid through ECHO, the Commission's Office for Humanitarian Aid. It has worked to alleviate the suffering of people affected by the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami and monsoon floods in 2006 and 2007, allocating nearly 70 million euro for humanitarian aid to India since 1996. It is much better, of course, to prevent disasters than to have to respond to their calamitous effects, which is why, 2 years ago, ECHO launched its 4th Disaster Preparedness Action Plan for South Asia. Earlier, environmental challenges used to be thought of as specific to regions or cities and their communities. Not anymore. The loss of biodiversity from deforestation is a loss to the world, and the emission of greenhouse gases, whether in Europe or India, affects the climate of the entire planet. Decisive action is needed if future generations are to have food, water, and clean air for their minimum needs. The EU has already set itself some ambitious and legally binding targets: 20% reduction in the emission of greenhouse gases, 20% improvement in energy efficiency, and a 20% increase in the share of renewables in energy consumption. It is also supporting environmentally sustainable projects throughout the developing world, including in India. The European Business and Technology Centre was set up in New Delhi recently to promote research and business in the fields of energy, environment, biotechnology, and clean technologies. Renewable energies are also the focus of an EU-supported effort to increase joint research projects.
Climate change for me is by far the biggest challenge that the farmers worldwide have to tackle.
With climate change and global warming becoming increasingly destructive in their impact, the EU and India have everything to gain from working together. European and Indian leaders share a strong belief that science and technology have a major role to play in finding solutions to many of the challenges facing the world: clean fuels and energy, reducing waste in manufacturing, sustainable agriculture, new drugs to fight epidemics, and public transport. The EU has now opened its 7th Framework Programme for research to scientists and laboratories in India and other developing countries. In its very first year, Indian scientists from 140 institutions have contributed to more than 80 projects. In addition, 40 Marie Curie fellowships in European laboratories have been awarded to Indians. A further impetus to scientific exchange was given by the signing of an ambitious science and technology agreement between the two sides in 2007. The EU and India are partners in the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, or ITER, and an agreement on cooperation in fusion technology was signed at the 10th EU-India Summit in November 2009. For the European Union, India is a friend with similar values and interests. As partners, they are working together for an open world trading system, global peace and security, sustainable growth, development, and combating climate change. The wide range of ongoing dialogue and cooperation initiatives shows that India and the EU are determined to achieve their objectives.